Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
What if you could double your energy naturally without caffeine or stimulants in just 3 short months? It's not only possible, you can transform every aspect of your health if you follow the 12-week blueprint we've created for you in the Awesome Health System. The Awesome Health System is a free course where you receive a daily video lesson spanning the most cutting-edge secrets for air, water, exercise, sunshine, optimizers, mindset, and education. It's something most companies would charge hundreds of dollars for, yet you get it for free when you go to bioptimizers.com. To access your course, register to download the PDF report called 3 Phases of Bioptimization, which gets you access to the report and daily access to the first lesson in the 12-week, 84-day Awesome Health course. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And today, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, sex, in particular, sexual health optimization, and something known as the Adamo method. And we'll get into that in a minute. And our guest today, I'm going to really put her to the test here. See, she's a sex expert, a health optimization person, but basically Dr. Molly Maloof provides health optimization and personalized medicine to high-achieving entrepreneurs, investors, and technology executives. For 3 years, she taught a pioneering course on health span in the wellness department of the medical school at Stanford University before launching her own company, Adamo Bioscience. Now, the vision of her company is to demonstrate that love is measurable, modifiable, and a key factor in healing. She is pioneering a new sex therapy program and envisions a future where psychedelic-assisted sex therapy is a pathway to resolve sexual dysfunction, strengthen relationship bonds, and improve sexual health. Since 2012, she has worked as an advisor or consultant to more than 50 companies in the digital health, consumer health, and biotechnology industries. Dr. Maloof is on the frontier of personalized medicine, digital health technologies, biofeedback-assisted lifestyle interventions, psychedelic medicine, and science-backed wellness products and services. And she joins us today from the rural wildlands of Wyoming, correct?
Yep.
So we had a nice little chat beforehand, and we were talking about, elk and deer and winter and rural areas and in opposition to urban, digital, high-tech environments, which is kind of your background.
Yeah.
I want to know, the idea of love and healing, I think, is just an awesome concept to begin with.
Yeah.
And it essentially, there's a drive inside of us that is searching for love, and it's the theme of half the music in the world.
Mm-hmm.
It's the theme behind most psychotherapy. It's the reason people fall into relationships, drugs, pursuit of excellence, business, sports, everything, you name it. Like Mike Tyson talks about, he was fighting so he could get love. You see heroin addicts that were fighting to find love. You hear musicians and people.
Wars have been fought over love.
Right. Right. So I want to know, let's start right there. What is love from your perspective?
Yeah. So there's so many different ways to actually study and analyze love. Like I literally read probably 50 papers on the topic. And I was searching, like my entire career, I've been searching for what is like this one question. What is health? How do you measure it? How do you improve it? And so I got really obsessed with like first principles. This is what you learn in Silicon Valley, is like break everything down into the core truth. And, as somebody who is like primarily, like I was based in the core sciences as my career, I've learned that there's certainly scientific explanations to what love is. And then there's obviously the mystical side of it, right? There's something far beyond the things I'm about to tell you, there is a spiritual facet of love that is like so fundamental to the core of the existence of life that like I can't explain that necessarily, but I can definitely explain why humans evolved love. And I believe that the kind of like when you think about like love, you need to think about it as a motivational force. And what is a force, right? A force is literally what gets an object to move. And it's a motivational force that drives people together to create bonds, to ensure the sharing of information and resources, to ensure the survival and propagation of the species. So if we did not love, we would not live, we would not survive as a species. So when I discovered that this was so fundamental to human existence, I was like, how is this missing from medicine? Like this is like a really important part of life. And it's also one of the driving factors to human suffering. So like a lot of people are suffering from illness and disease because of relationship problems, because of chronic stress. I mean, when people go to work environments that are toxic, they can become sick regularly. And I saw this in my practice over and over again. I would see certain clients would not be getting better, no matter everything we were doing right for their health. And I was like, something is up here. And then I found out that they were having raging fights with their spouse and they were just on the brink of divorce and they were just struggling in a deep, deep way to maintain that primary connection. And I was just thinking to myself, wow, I can't actually control for that. Like that is beyond, like, there's a lot of things you do in a decade of working with clients that is about biology. It's about measuring and improving and wearable technology and getting blood sugar in order. And then when you actually start to get to know people on a deep level, you realize that human relationships are the greatest factor, if they're healthy, the greatest factor in longevity and happiness, period. Like, I don't care how many small molecules we can invent to get people to live to 150. Your quality of your relationships is the quality of your life. And if the quality of your life is consistently bad, the physical health is going to suffer. And if you think about loneliness, right? Like there was San Jose recently, the city of San Jose declared an emergency of loneliness. And it's like a public emergency, like public health emergency, because loneliness is worse for your health than smoking, drinking, sedentary behavior, and obesity. So we've been spending like the last 20 years trying to figure out how to get people healthier by changing their smoking habits, by changing their drinking habits, by changing their food habits. And we've been missing the elephant in the room, which is it's our relationship habits that are actually driving so many problems. And we don't get taught how to have healthy relationships in school. Kids go to school, and frankly, it's kind of a war zone for most kids. Like you have to be, I mean, every one of my male clients, you hear stories about bullying, you hear stories about getting beat up. Girls, you hear stories of like being ostracized from a group of kids. Like kids can be brutal. And
Right.
like,
Let's talk about that for a second. I want to talk about
yeah,
it. I also have a competing theory in this. So
yeah,
I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole without
sure.
discussing some of the elements that you brought
Yeah,
forth here. So if I heard you correctly, and for our listeners who are following along, we're going to try and
yeah,
deconstruct some things and then come up with some sort of more holistic version. And the primary challenge, from what I understood here, that you've been able to come up with or sussed out is that you learned a Newtonian paradigm causality based model based on physiology, biology,
evolutionary
biochemistry,
biology.
and the scope, scale, and diversity of the devices that we can cultivate to measure these to come up with a working scientific theory, a idea that
Yeah,
through this and the manipulation of one or multitude of these variables, we can create different outcomes than we're currently creating.
yeah.
Okay, which is the realm of science.
Which is
Now,
real science. And
but
also
we're applying
working acknowledge
science to
with the,
humans,
yeah,
but humans have this other dimension.
yeah,
So it's almost like an interdimensionary field between science and spirituality. In
yes,
that, when someone sings that angelic high soprano sound, your body goes into a response.
hmm
When one is in love with a person and they touch you in a certain way, there is a biological reactivity, a chain of biochemical events that transpire, which are outside the predictable paradigm that you've presented from a scientific model. There's like, you can measure the changes, but why is that connection activating this where another one that would be totally inappropriate? What's going on there and what is the variance? And so the psychologists and sexologists and stuff have focused a lot on that, or the esoteric principles inside these, whether it's tantra or sexual therapy and all these sort of things, or that people have engaged in all its variances, from pornography to brothels to, dating to marriage to polygamy, and then all of the psychological perspectives, books, and illustrations are on that. And so right now, despite a plethora of information out there from all realms, what you've concluded is that as a general rule in industrialized Western society, which is, we enjoy a lot of the benefits today because of the Newtonian paradigm, this other aspect, this spiritual connective, this love, this deep, integrative, truly human aspect that not only creates a quality life, but probably extends as a quantity of life by all the longevity research. You're bridging that gap, or attempting to.
Trying.
What prompted you, or what actions at what point did you say, I've got to go into this because this is a field that needs explored far more deeply, and then that's going to lead to probably where your research is now. So I just want to kind of, how did you get down this?
How did I get down this rabbit hole?
Yeah. What happened to get you there?
I've been really searching since I was a child for understanding the roots of human suffering. And it sounds like a very heavy thing to be doing as a kid, but I had a very challenging year as a kid. In fifth grade, I was a 10-year-old, and there was a lot of trauma in my family, that just deaths and traumatic experiences that didn't affect me directly, but it affected me indirectly. And it was
did you have like an ACEs assessment on that?
I wouldn't call any of these, I wouldn't say that I had like a bunch of ACEs. It's interesting. It was more of, I saw my grandfather die. I saw my aunt die. I didn't see them physically die, but like my aunt died in a tragic way. My grandfather died of Alzheimer's. And something happened to someone close to me that woke me up. And I kind of like woke up as a kid, and I was like, oh my God, life isn't fair. Bad things happen to good people. We're going to die. There's a whole bunch. I was born into a really loving family, and I have parents that will put me to bed every night and make sure I'm full. And I just realized and woke up to like, holy crap, like I got really lucky. I need to figure out how to help people, because this whole human existence thing is not fair. People don't get dealt fair.
It's funny you should say that, because I went through a prolonged sickness with my sister, who died prematurely at 22. And on my yearbook at 18, I also made the exact same conclusion. I said, life isn't fair, neither am I. And then after a spiritual renaissance at 22, which radically changed my paradigm, I recognize how I came to that conclusion and the fallaciousness within it, and that I needed to explore a more internal spiritual realm that had more meaning for me. And that's how I made that trend. And then my life since that time has been dedicated to alleviate human suffering. It's actually in our values for the company of Bioptimizers, but it's been inherent in my being since that time, because of that same thing, that almost that abrupt loss of love or awareness that, hey, my life isn't a guarantee. My health isn't a guarantee. The pain train's coming for everybody. Yeah. And this, and although that can be traumatic, I think there is an extraordinary amount of benefit if you can get exposed to that as early as possible. And as traumatic as it's going to be at that time, I think it sets in motion neurocognitive development in a way that it becomes beneficial long-term. And we kind of insulate death away from the population, unlike other countries. Like, I'm in India and there's like dead people on the ground.
Totally.
And, like, you know what I mean? Like It's full on.
Yeah.
You go to the slums of Mumbai, which I've been,
Yeah.
or the slums of Kolkata,
Mhm.
which I've been, and,
Wow.
or Varanasi, and these type places. And it's a level, like the intensity and magnitude of the suffering, disease, dysfunction, harshness. I'm
Yeah.
sitting here having a lassi, and like every 2 minutes they're running with a dead body to go burn at the ghats because that's part of their
Yeah.
spiritual stuff. Like every couple minutes, there's a bunch of people going and they're throwing bodies and the smoke's in the air, burning people, which is a spiritual renaissance for them in that culture.
I
And you're
mean,
going, I know nothing,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's a mind crash. So
Yeah.
keep going, and
I
then I
mean,
started kind of paradigm, but I think this is
I
there's
really
so
relate
much
to you.
there's so much victimology around. I've been traumatized. I've been bullied. And I have a theory about this, and I'd like your opinion on it.
Yeah.
And that is, I believe we did a massive disservice starting with the play date. And and hear me out, because normally kids were kind of left amongst themselves and they had to learn what was socially acceptable and what was
Yep.
not socially acceptable.
Yep.
If I call Billy names and Billy punches me in the mouth, or if I character assassinate Sally, that's probably going to come back to me. Those are the general forms of violence that differ between men and women. Usually it's
Yeah.
character assassination for women and physical
Yeah.
violence for men. And then
Yeah.
there are crossovers between those two.
Yeah.
And then we started doing this digital world where nobody trusted anybody. And so then it became play dates. And so what happened, and rather than the normal socialization, it became, how can I put my position forward to the supervisor? And that's led to conditioning of, well, maybe the government's going to sort it, or a regulatory board, or we need to save this or protect this, and we've got these hypersensitive individuals because somebody called me a name or somebody
Yep.
didn't like what I produced. And I don't know how to handle it because I'm looking for an arbitrator to manage my emotional and lack of social integration. And that
Yeah.
has proliferated now and exacerbated with digital technology. Because I can sit here in my home and call anybody anything that I wouldn't say to their
Oh,
face,
yeah.
because I'm not faced with that energetic point. And this energetic point, this vibe, the frequency, the feeling, this part here is essentially what you're talking about. The
Yeah.
friction between trauma, interaction, people, and the sensation or the connection that love is. Like it's a
Yes.
repelling force if it's not love, and it's an
Yeah.
attracting force if it is.
There's basically two emotions. There's like, is it towards or away, right? Like, it's like even single cell organisms literally behave this way. Like, is this thing safe? Is this thing not safe? So like this safety versus not safety is like really fundamental because,
Mm.
when we have formed these attachment bonds, we are literally trying to, I mean, we're on a rock being hurled through space, trying to survive
So
first and
awesome.
foremost, right?
Sometimes
We're
I
trying,
just sit here in the place and just go, woo!
yeah,
I'm
right.
going a million and a half miles an hour spinning. Woo!
It's wild. And the thing is,
Wild.
like, like the core fundamental biological things that you need to do to stay healthy are you need to make sure you properly feed this metabolism and
Mhm.
move this body and you get the rest, movement, recovery, and food. Like, this is fundamental, which is everything you write about in your books. But once you've got mastered metabolism, like that's your survival, right? Do I have enough resources to survive? Typically, like we have a lot more success in accumulating resources and frankly like the capacity to survive if we have strong social connections. So having a
I want
strong
to just
yeah,
interject for a quick second because you brought up. I think, like, I came from the world of bodybuilders
yeah,
who are masters at mastering metabolism.
yeah,
But I would say a great number of them, their skill set in doing that actually takes them away from this other part, the
yes,
social connection.
yes. And that's the thing I've been trying to figure out is like, okay, what is social connection? What is human connection? Like, what is this force that I can, like, my friend, I'm like, hey, texting my friend Ben. He's like, I was literally just thinking about you 2 days ago. It's so funny you mentioned you called me. I'm personally very fascinated by like that mystical experience of like think about someone, they call you. Like I love, love, love when that happens. Or like I show up in people's dreams. Like I don't, we are, there's so much we don't understand about this space. But the thing that I have figured out is that at a very core level, there's three drives that are literally make up this human love complex. And it's the sex drive, the drive to fall in love, and it's a drive to attach. And the sex drive is what gets people to move to find a partner or find a number of partners in order to enhance the chances of finding one that you actually become physically addicted to, which is what romantic love is. And I've like studied romantic love. There's passion, commitment, and emotional intimacy, right?
Quick question
There,
on the
yeah,
history of romantic love,
yeah,
which seems to be more of an emerging phenomenon over the
for
last
sure.
few hundred years, because most marriages
They're
in
arranged.
very survival were arranged and organized. I was listening to an interview with
Yeah,
Francis Ngannou. So for people who don't know Francis Ngannou, I think it's the greatest story in sports. And he was illustrating something on Shannon Sharp's podcast I thought was
yeah,
radical, in that he comes from Cameroon in a very tough spot. And anyone who produces value, like becomes successful as a man, he has to take someone on as a bride in the village because the village demands it. And in fact, if he's very successful, he's got to take on wives in other villages because it's seen as like that's part of the culture. And if his brother dies, he's got to take on his brother's wife,
yeah,
because this is not has anything to do with romance or interest, or this is a survival dynamics which is
yes,
as real as it gets. So we're
yeah,
literally living in a time where people are operating from that paradigm, and then we have people, within I call it the 1980s power ballad.
yeah,
I think that was the best example of,
yeah,
romantic love or your romantic yearning. And I grew up right in the middle of that. So I do power ballads here at night, down here in my studio. So keep expanding on that. I just wanted to interject that
yeah,
because this is a really real aspect of what makes life juicy.
yeah. I mean,
So romantic
so
love, to get back to
if you
romantic
think
love. What
about
is
like
romantic love
if you
exactly?
think about romantic love in a few different ways, one is it's a commitment device. It literally is like I believe at a fundamental core level, we evolved it so that you will stick with someone for long enough to make sure that that kid doesn't die. And it's kind of sad because we have this pie in the sky idea of romantic love being like, it's going to last forever. And the truth is that it only lasts if you decide that you're going to make it work, right? Most people, when the love starts to fade after a few years, they're like, I gotta live with myself and this person. What is this about? And it's like, I do think that I think that some of the benefits of spirituality and religion were that it was trying to get people to actually consistently choose to be in a bonded relationship despite the fluctuating feelings that you're going to have with your neurotransmitters and chemical cocktails. But the attachment drive is really, really important because let's say you fall in love and you have a baby, you need to like when you hold that baby, you're getting oxytocin by
Mhm.
just holding the child. And that oxytocin bonds you to that child so that you ensure that this child is going to survive. And it's also no surprise that kids and when something looks like you're going to probably be a little bit more attached to it because you're like, oh, this is part of me is in this thing, right?
Mhm.
So we needed to evolve these actual physiological motivational drives in order to drive species forward. And
Yep.
my thought is that we have evolved, we're evolving past marriage as a social construct solely for survival to a construct designed for ensuring the longevity of ourselves. Because like in primitive times, you just want to make sure that kid survived so that your genes went on. Now we're like, how do we live as long as possible? Families that are actually connected, that are bonded, that are attached, that are intergenerationally attached, have far more support and far more resources than families that are broken apart into pieces, right? Like
Mhm.
we actually do need to bring back the bonds of family for our survival. Like it is paramount to live a long and healthy life that you are not alone. And so I'm very fortunate. I was born into an incredibly loving family and a very strong family network, but that has been lost. And I think technology is hugely responsible for the breakdown, as well as social policies. Like
So I want to talk on that, just a
yeah.
quick comment on that. So I think a great example of how to illustrate this is that digital technology
Hmm.
is essentially a approximation of normal connective experiences in the human condition, which we've inherited over millions of years of evolution. So,
Yeah.
in other words, it's not actually the connection. There's a certain degree of it, but proximity and in like actual physical connection and stuff seems to have, and I'm leading somewhere with this, a much stronger bonding effect to alleviate aloneness
Hmm.
and social
Hmm.
structure and the dependency and survival of the species
Yeah.
and the value within having children and grandparents and uncles and aunties and cousins and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Versus, say, if we look on the deviant side, and because we're leading into the sex conversation, if you look at let's take males, and I want you to give the female perspective. So an emerging phenomenon since the internet is that men are able to experience some sort of radical approximation of sexual gratification
Yeah.
through an artificially created medium that isn't the actuality, but is a close enough replication that you become addicted to it, which has
Yep.
uh, corollary sexual dysfunction or distortion of sexual relationships, which is a certain component of normal relationships. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have females who, like, there's a difference. Men have to go out and be rejected a lot of times because of the laws of hypergamy,
Yeah.
right? And then females who can distribute their uh, sexual attractiveness or their replicatable desirability from a biological standpoint can now disseminate that digitally in an approximation to have an extraordinary amount of potential suitors to that idea that you couldn't even possibly deal with. Like, you see these people with 1 million fans or 30,000
Yeah.
fans, and then you can actually convert that into cash through some form of either pornography, even
OnlyFans.
sexual, even the sexual provocativeness around products and services, and
Yep.
then
Kardashians.
OnlyFans, and then there's all these other distorted. So we have two distorted things, and the net result is 30% of men in the last year have not had sex with any person. And what is it now? How is it? Forget what the percentage of females in their 30s that haven't had children, and half of those are never going to have children anymore.
Yeah.
In the corollary aspect of human civilization, what's
Yeah.
your take on all that? Where does that fit from your perspective as someone who is really into this connection,
Yeah.
intimacy, love component?
So the one thing I will say is, for the audience listening, we figured out pretty quickly that processed food was bad for you because processed food hijacks these primitive drives, right? Salt, sugar, fat.
Yeah,
Like it's a hijacking of the things that we need to survive,
yeah,
but we are hijacking them in order to sell products.
yeah.
Pornography is processed sexual connection.
Well,
Social media,
can you say that again?
pornography is processed sexual connection.
Correct.
And social media is processed human connection. And so when we are turning to our phones for human connection, it is a processed version of it. It is not the real thing. It is
Right.
just never going to be the real thing. And the real thing, you can smell, you can taste, you can touch, you can hear, and you can see, but you're only getting sight and hear and sound from a computer. So you're not actually getting the actual electromagnetic field of another person that you can literally feel when you're with someone. Like your brain has EEG, it can be picked up. Your brain has electromagnetic frequencies and fields. Your heart has electromagnetic frequencies and fields. Your body has a whole electromagnetic field. You just cannot transmit that perfectly through a screen. And so you're not getting all the things you need, and especially touch, right? Like, so touch is like so important because touch is like, am I safe with this person? You
Yes.
know?
You're now in a vulnerable situation that you have to alleviate the threat detection.
Yeah.
And I think that's more pronounced in females. I know I know, I think it's Mossad uses a lot of female intelligence officers to pick up threat perceptions because they're superior to men in doing so.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, you know, because it's partially intuition, right? Partially
Mhm.
it's like, what is your
And what
gut
is
versus
intuition? What do
uh,
you feel is intuition? Because we all talk about it, we all kind of know what it is, but what would you how would you classify intuition? Because again, that's in kind of this um, like nebulous dimension of love. I think intuition
yeah.
would also fall under that category.
To me, one of the best ways I've heard intuition described, because it's really tricky to actually trust and understand gut feelings, because there's like there's a certain level of just human neurosis that we often mistake for intuition, and it's actually fear responses, it's unresolved trauma, it's unresolved psychological relationships with parent wounds, child wound. Like there's all sorts of garbage that just gets thrown into intuition, but it's actually just like you don't have your internal world sorted out properly and you're just neurotic. Then there's like the quiet voice that in times of peace will whisper to you. And that's what you want to listen to as your intuition. But you have to be quiet and still to hear that. Like you can't hear it if it's loud and there's like a lot of nonsense going on. Then this is why you need to meditate, because meditation is training your intuition. It's training your capacity to truly listen to your higher self versus the monkey mind, the neurotic ego that is just running the show at most times and like is not intuition. It's actually just you being a crazy person, which most people are just absolutely absurd. Like most people are just like running just scripts and ruminations and anxieties and like, especially when it comes to relationships, right? Like
Mhm.
relationships are going to mirror all of your neurosis back to you. So
Right.
like most of what
And
we
then you
deal with
project those neuroses onto the other
onto
person.
I am like a master at admitting that I'm projecting. Like
Mhm.
I got into an argument with my boyfriend recently and I was like, you're not texting, you're not calling, and you're not when I'm out of town. And he's like, and you're just not being affectionate. And he's like, hey, are you doing any of these things? And I was like, no. He was like, so maybe part of this is you. And I was like, oh. And I was like, yeah, I'm literally creating my reality and blaming you for it. And it's like, we have to be the best thing you can learn as an adult is being responsible. And that means a bunch of different things. But one of the things is like being capable of responding appropriately to a situation and also just taking complete responsibility for your life and your decisions no matter how ridiculous your life is, you have to, if the moment you wake up and you start taking responsibility for everything that happens to you, the moment you actually start experiencing true freedom
Yeah,
because you
I
stop
have a
blaming it.
policy in my company
Yeah.
is everything is my fault. Now what?
Yeah. That's the best leadership skill you can gain is like, can you take responsibility for everything that goes wrong at your company?
100%. It's all my
Everything.
fault. I'm like, don't worry,
Yeah.
guys. It's all my fault. Now how do we
Yeah.
fix this? Or
Yeah. People,
it's my
I
fault. It's
mean,
good.
this is
I'm
like a
good with it.
sidebar, but like people think that entrepreneurship is like you're the boss of everyone. But the best advice I got is that everyone's your boss. Your customers are your boss. Your clients are your boss. Your employees are your boss. Like you are at the bottom of like you're not at the top. You are at the bottom. And like if you start looking at your job that way as an entrepreneur, then you have a chance. But if you think that it's other people's fault and you blame other people for your issues at your company, then you'll never really be able to truly succeed or be the kind of leader you want to
Or
be.
even if you get to what is perceived as success, you'll be miserable
Yeah,
because you'll
exactly.
always be unhappy with that which isn't meeting the expectations or directions or things that you want. And somebody is a culprit. So now you are essentially a victim. You
Yeah.
immediately set yourself up as a victim. And when you set yourself up as a victim, you either become vindictive. I got to get rid of those people. That person needs to be eliminated, which is the dark side of human psyche, right?
Yeah.
And the whole thing, cascades into, like it's worse, like narcissistic megalomania,
Yeah.
psychotic megalomania, which is earmarks of totalitarian regimes, to this other version that is like more of along Zen, Buddhism, Christianity, Torah. Like you can go down all the other kind of value systems of integration of responsibility,
Yeah.
regardless of how hard or difficult or unfair. And I like the Christ story about that particularly. I think
Yeah.
as an allegory, it's a great thing. Here's your cross, bear it. You're going to be falsely accused. You're going to be betrayed by people who love you. You're going to be slandered about things you didn't do. And eventually crucified in a horrible, torturous way to end your existence. And it's like, yeah, fine.
Yeah.
Wow, that changes, and just that concept gives you a model to start alleviating that what you're talking about here, that nervous system projecting out of the amygdala center, which is jacking you up about fear response. What about this? What about that? What about this?
Yeah.
Would you say that overstimulation of that stem center is the fundamental biological limiter in about the experience of presence?
So,
or what's the deal there? And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at masszymes.com.
yeah, so I think
Physiology.
this is like a really fun segue into like the Adamo method, because
Sweet.
I want to like really talk about the autonomic nervous system for a second, because your
Yeah.
autonomic nervous system,
Can you explain what the autonomic nervous system is?
yeah.
What people are
So
like, the different
if
types of
anybody,
nervous system classifications, because people get
sure.
lost in that.
So I have one of my advisors of my company is this woman, Sue Carter, and I actually met her through her husband, Stephen Porges. And Stephen Porges is a renowned researcher in the science of stress. And so as much attention as other research, stress researchers, but he's pretty famous. And I would say that his polyvagal theory is one of the best theories on the autonomic nervous system that I have found. And it's basically presupposes that there's the parasympathetic and there's the sympathetic. And the sympathetic is the fight or flight, but then the parasympathetic is the dorsal or the vagal. And the dorsal is basically like the freeze response. It's like your parasympathetic is always known, it's basically been known as like the rest and digest, the safety zone, but the parasympathetic can also be protecting you from danger. So when you get hit with like a dangerous situation that you cannot escape, your body will freeze. And that freeze response is thought to be responsible by the dorsal vagal system. And then there's the ventral vagal system, which is the safety, trust, and love. It's like it's when you think about a person who's in a safe situation with a loved one, they're touching closely. They're literally like their abdomen is exposed. Their bodies are open. They're potentially next to each other. And there's a connection to this other person that is a safe space. So the
It's like when a dog rolls over, says
when a dog rolls over on its
of you
back
to
and
like
like
pat its belly because
arms
it's
in the
out.
air, it's like you're my master and I'm safe.
Right.
And when you're like crouched up and like, oh my God, don't touch me, that's, and like, or let's say you dissociate and you're totally frozen because you're just like, what's going on right now? That's the dorsal vagal like activating, right? So when people get traumatized, and by the way, trauma doesn't have to be like a like horrible car accident or a rape or something. It can be birth trauma. So I had a really bad birth trauma. I was like cord prolapse and nuchal cord, which means the cord was wrapped around my neck and it was above my head. So every time my mom was pushing, I was choking and almost dying. And so my birth, basically, like when I came out of the womb through a C-section, it was like I was wired differently than the rest of my siblings. Like I was just always a little bit more on edge, and always a little sicker than my siblings. And I always just I had regular illnesses, and none of my sisters got as sick like I did. And typically, if you have a birth trauma, you also have gut dysfunction because you basically your autonomic nervous system gets wired towards fear and threat. But yeah, so basically, if your autonomic nervous system experiences any form of major trauma as a child or as an adult, you get wired towards trying to prevent that from happening again. So your body says, that was dangerous. I don't want that to ever happen again. How would I protect myself? I'm going to make sure that I have a hyper aware nervous system, and I'm going to be hyper vigilant so that
Mm,
anything that enters my field that could potentially resemble that experience, I'm going to make sure that I don't encounter. Now, here's the real screwed up thing. This is
mhm.
the thing that I really don't fully understand. I'm trying to figure out. It's not uncommon if a child or an adult has a really bad traumatic experience with a caregiver or a loved one, that they will re-experience that with future relationships. So oftentimes the wiring we got, if we got wired for love with a caregiver who also was abusive, we get mixed wiring. So our wiring says, well, if it's not a slightly abusive relationship, that's not real love. Because that's what I was taught love was as a child. So now we have these adults going into relationships, re-experiencing these problems that they dealt with as children. And they don't understand why they're repeating these problems and these habits. It's because they never were able to work that out of the body. So we don't actually do a lot of somatic psychological therapy on kids and adults. It's like very new field of psychology is working on the body level, not on the psychological level. And don't get me wrong, you got to deal with the cognitive structures of like what happened to you and why it happened. But if you don't deal with the physiological facets of your functioning and your wiring, it's really hard to just change the brain through thought. And one of the things that we decided to do at my company was we wanted to develop a therapeutic modality that could help human relationships thrive. And I was looking at the science of love. I was like, okay, there's the sex drive, there's a drive to have emotional closeness and commitment, passion, and intimacy. And then there's the drive to, and also merging of two people. Like there's a inclusion of other scale for romantic love. And it's how much does this person and this person overlap in their lives? The inclusion of that person in their world. And then there's the attachment drives, right? So I wanted to develop a therapeutic paradigm that could actually address each level of love. I was like, this can't, no one's done this before. Let's see if it can be done. So I hired these sex therapists and I said, here is the job. I'm going to pay you guys this much money to develop a therapy that's somatic that could be used with or without psychedelics. Because I do believe that for certain facets of human relationship problems, psychedelics actually are an incredible tool, but they are not a cure-all and they are not a panacea and they do not work for everybody. But for people with PTSD, for people with sexual trauma, for people with a hyperactive amygdala, uh, it can be a really great way to reset things. And for
Mhm.
relationships that have been, people have been terrorizing each other, and maybe that, but they're still committed and they want to make it work and they're not ready to end it. I've seen psychedelics save relationships. And so doesn't mean that they work for everybody. They can certainly bond people together that shouldn't be bonded together. And if you sit with the wrong practitioner, you can certainly endanger yourself. So like you got to choose your shaman or therapist like like a neurosurgeon. Like you need to know this is a person that you can trust. But I wanted to develop a sex therapy that was a paradigm shift from sensate therapy because sensate therapy was invented by Masters and Johnson in the 60s and it hadn't been reinvented since. So I was like, I want to develop a therapeutic method that can address human intimacy and also potentially work alongside MDMA, which may be approved by MAPS in the next 5 years. Hopefully, they're getting closer and closer to approval.
Mhm, mhm. I know it was
Um,
just recently turned down in California for some reasons from the Newsom government, but then there's a reemergent. I was talking to the guys from
yeah.
Third Wave the other day on
Well,
a
the
podcast.
California ballot initiative was one run by this doctor. She was looking to get a ballot initiative added that was about creating a path for psychedelic research. And this I would say psychedelics are where stem cells were 10 years ago,
Mhm,
where everybody was doubtful, everybody thought they were kind of ethically questionable. Everybody was like, I don't know, this might be playing God, like psychedelics are in this weird box of like gray area right now where it's like, are they safe? Are they unsafe? Stem cells now are becoming very widespread, very mainstream, very much acceptable. Yes, you still have to go to the Bahamas to get them in certain cases, but there's a lot of things you can do now with regenerative medicine that 10 years ago it was very taboo. So anyway, we designed this therapy, and the funny thing about this therapy was, as I was learning it from these therapists, I was like, whoa, you can have like really profound experiences with a partner that can be absolutely transcendent and actually psychedelic in nature without having to take any psychedelics at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, and if you're a healthy person, you can actually have even better sexual function. And so this is when I was like, whoa, we were actually onto something because, have you ever heard of the Doman method?
No.
So the Doman method's for children. It's like child development program. You give it to a kid right after the womb, and it actually was designed for kids with special needs to actually help them regain normal functioning neurologically and learning capacities. But they started using this method on normal children, and they actually were able to actually dramatically enhance development. So my boyfriend's son used the Doman method, and he speaks in full sentences, and he's like 2 years old, and he has like the coordination of a 4-year-old at 2, and he has the kind of enunciation of a 4-year-old at 2. And the kind of like, he's just like, it's really wild. He's like 2 years ahead of schedule. So when we were developing this method, it was specifically initially designed for sexual dysfunction and to actually help people with problems with arousal and desire, problems with sexual pain. I dealt with a lot of male and female clients that were actually having painful genitals after sex regularly. And that's a common problem that a lot of people don't realize can be totally fixed.
Mm-hmm.
And then anorgasmia, problems with erection, problems with lack of orgasm. It was really designed to attack these major sexual dysfunctions, but not replace sensate therapy, because sensate therapy is particularly good for relationships where people just have a lot of anxiety around sex. So like if you're deeply anxious around sex, our protocol really shouldn't be your first line therapy. You should really be dealing with sensate therapy because it's first about getting that sensual connection with your partner. That's what it is. It's sensate therapy is mindfulness based sensual touch. It's no sex on the table for about a month. It's great for certain things like performance anxiety, penetration anxiety, but it doesn't address the problems that happen during sex itself. And so Aaron Michael is a profoundly talented sex coach who really pioneered somatic practices that can actually enhance sexual contact. And then Dr. Saida Desilets, she developed a psychosexual method called the Desilets method. And she was really about combining the psycho and sexual pieces. So like, how do I combine the psychological with the physiological and really get you to connect to your body and to get your nervous system to relax into connection with your partner and yourself. So these two people came together, and in the process,
I'm actually friends with Saida.
yeah,
I've known
I met her
Saida for
through
about 25
Katrine.
years. I've known her for probably 25 years.
Yeah, I met her through Katrine Malinsky, who
Yeah,
we
yeah.
both
Right.
and so Syed and Aaron came together, and like basically the Adamo method was a bit of a baby of both of their expertise.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really designed to bring emotional closeness to actually literally if you actually practice this with a partner, which is designed as a digital health program, you go through it as an online program. It's an 8-week program. And we have pre and post questionnaires that are measuring the sex drive, sort of sexual dysfunction, sexual satisfaction, sexual communication, emotional closeness, the triangular theory of love, inclusion of other, and attachment. So
what is the triangular theory of love?
It's basically that there's passion, commitment, and intimacy, like emotional intimacy, that creates romantic love. And so if you have these three things, then you're going to be in a passion. You're going to be in like essentially like a consummate love relationship. So basically, if you have intimacy with passion, but no commitment, you have this feeling of romantic love. If you have intimacy, commitment, but no passion, you have companion love. So this is typically what people feel after like the passion's worn off and they're not really doing a lot of things to create the novelty.
Going through the motions.
And then there's infatuation, which is passion and commitment, but no intimacy. And it's fatuous love. And then if you just have commitment, it's empty love. If you just have intimacy, it's just you like the person. And if you just have passion, it's just infatuation. And so basically,
that's a really nice model.
It's a really nice model, actually. And so we wanted to measure of our method, which is the first week is basically just your orientation week. And then the second,
we're talking about the Adamo method, just
the Adamo method
for people. So
first week is just like you're getting to know the platform, you're getting to know us. And then the second 2 weeks is the psychosexual development of you and yourself and your relationship to sex, your relationship to your body, your relationship to your nervous system. And then the next 4 weeks are all about your relationship to your partner. So it's a steady, progressive practices that bring you closer and closer to your partner until there is lessons on penetration. So we were really like confused why we never got sex ed as adults or even teenagers. And so like what we're learning about sex is very pornographic and it's very forceful. It's very much about a man overtaking a woman or a man overtaking a man or a woman or what, lesbian sex is a little bit more gentle, but basically what we see in porn is like very kind of violent. And we were like,
so there's an aspect of this too, I think people should be aware of in your brain, and to talk about this, the crossover between violence and sexual arousal. And that can become distorted for people who go kind of that sadist, masochistic kind of more violent, torture-based, pain to pleasure kind of distortion. And in its extreme forms, it's, that's where you get all the weird, like scat and all that sort of stuff, as well as violence towards each other. And this also is an interesting occurrence that happens oftentimes in war.
Yeah.
There's a unique thing that seems to happen in war as well that's activated. So anyways, I just wanted to kind of touch that a little bit for our listeners as we come back to it. I didn't want to distort, but I want to start understanding if we've got this aspect of what creates connection, the different types of connections. There's an opposing force as well that takes you darker and darker into these other forms of sexual expression.
Yeah. And so we were like, okay, one of the biggest problems in sexual relationships is this. It's almost like, this sort of antiquated version of marriage, which is about like ownership. Well, there's this sort of antiquated experience of sex for a lot of women in particular, and even gay men, which is like one partner is going to be the dominant partner and one partner is going to be the submissive partner, and the submissive partner just has to sort of give in to whatever the dominant partner wants. What we are teaching is that you can be an active receiver. And you can learn to bring in your partner with your body. You can literally learn to like arouse yourself through pelvic floor breathing, literally creating like moving energy and blood flow into your genitals. So it's not just about your partner turning you on, it's about you being able to turn yourself on. And then learning to bring in a partner into you, whether you are engaging, let's say you're gay or straight, whether this method is not heteronormative, it's actually designed for any type of sexual body. But fundamentally, it's about creating physical intimacy and emotional intimacy between you and your partner in a way that enables you to communicate with your bodies, not just your words, and read another person's body and understand what they want or don't want by their body language. And then also learn to actually bring in a partner into you in a way that you enjoy. So it's not just about you being penetrated by someone, it's about them being an adaptive giver and you being an active receiver. And when you have these roles in place that feel far more connected and more intimate, you can be in a dance with your partner. And then Aaron basically pioneered, and his Instagram account is actually called Suction Sex, because the concept of suction is different than friction. Friction is about the in and out activity, but suction is about that physical connection between you and your partner, where there's a lot more physiology touching, the more anatomy touching than there is just the active motions of thrusting. So the intention is to learn to move with your hips versus your legs. That it actually reduces the amount of effort that you have to do to actually engage sexually. And when you create suction, it's actually really helpful for people in who are getting older and their bodies are changing. And your body will, go in and out of lubrication and in and out of erection. And engaging in friction-based sex is not always conducive to actual full pleasure, because your body's going to change throughout the cycle throughout the whole experience of sex.
So to back up for our listeners, you can follow along. So essentially what you're saying is the current promotion of sexual experience or education is largely on a friction-based model, and which is not conducive to maybe a suction-based or an electromagnetic things like the magnetic connection of love, which we're talking about, the non-linear part of an
Yeah.
experience would be the equivalent of the opposing polarities of a magnet become this, and the other side is a repulsion. So
Yeah.
friction-based one is likely going to ultimately lead to it would be higher. There would be a higher likelihood over time that friction force is any type of friction creates wear on a system. Anybody that
Yes.
understands this in system design, but
Yes.
a magnetic force, a pulling force, right,
Yes.
is that sense, that 80s power ballad pulling sensation that you feel when they're singing a song, or that
Mhm.
when you think of your beloved
Yeah.
in that magnetizing, I can't wait to be with you, I can't wait to touch you, I can't wait to hold you, I can't wait to be magnetically tied to you in these variety of forms. And these formats would be a systematic methodology for activating magnetic connection within the individual. So that would that be
Pretty much,
reasonable? Would
it's
that be a
pretty much like
reasonable?
the best way to I've heard it described. And the thing that I really want to encourage people to understand is that you have masculinity and femininity within you. Everybody has it, right? Like we have part of our mother and part of our father in each of us. We have we have masculinity and femininity. We have our gender and we have our sexual organs that may or may not be, depending whatever you identify with. But when you're engaged in sexual connection, there could be Shiva and there could be Shakti within a woman, you know? And the thing that I've learned, and the funny thing about this method is like, I realized that there were times where I was in a more masculine role in the act of penetration, where I was maybe on top of a partner, and I was causing pain, I was causing soreness for both of us because I was actually engaging in too much friction myself. And so Aaron and Sayeda actually had to school me. I mean, like I've only become marginally a marginal like expert in sexuality compared to the average doctor, not compared to what Aaron and Sayeda are at. They're literally Olympic level. But I would consider myself fairly intermediate expertise. And that has come from working with these two phenomenal people who I think are the next Masterson Johnson, who've basically taught me that like I actually needed to learn to be a better adaptive giver just as much as I needed to learn to be a better active receiver. So you need to learn both of these roles if you are going to actually engage in the full spectrum of sexual experience. And and so like you need to maintain polarity in the relationship. First, psychologically, that's one thing, but then physiologically, it's a whole nother thing, right? It's like whoever is leading, it doesn't really matter. There's going to be a back and forth, right? Like there's going to be a dance in a sexual experience. Um, but the key is being able to adapt to what your partner needs in that moment and being able to receive in an active way, not just to lay there and just be, like nobody wants a wet noodle in bed, right? We want to have someone who's engaged in the process. And that can be, I mean,
So,
this
so
this
let's
is
go back
like,
to that
yeah,
piece, that construct, let's say, for a
sure.
second. And in that state, what needs or what aspects of that triangle are not being addressed properly to kind of give, I want to kind of give an illustrative component. If
Yeah.
someone is just like maybe hyper aggressive or hyper passive, let's say we're going to
Yeah.
use these extremes as an illustrative example for our listeners. What would be the tendencies if you're experiencing this in your relationship and would like something else? What is the higher likelihoods of that?
Well, one thing I will add as a sidebar is that everybody should learn Jaya's erotic blueprint because there is a time and a place for kink.
Mm-hmm.
And some people, it's their preferred way of relating sexually.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's the shapeshifter, the kink, the sexual, the sensual, and the energetic. And her erotic blueprint basically describes levels of intensity of physical touch and sort of polarity and connection, right? Energetic people, you don't even need to touch them to get them to start to orgasm. Like you can be across the room and they can be starting to like shake. Kink is going to be the other end of the spectrum where it's like people want hard, fast, strong, dominant submission. They want that. They want all of it. And then shapeshifters are going to go everything in between. Sensual is a bit more of like they need the senses stimulated. They need smell, taste, touch. They want it softer. Sexual is like, come on, just give it to me. I just want to have sex. So I love her blueprint so much because we're not teaching everything in this method. We are specifically trying to teach a new way for people who are struggling with their experiences sexually to actually open up a door to more pleasurable experiences with a partner. But that's not to discount the entire spectrum of human sexuality, which is actually like there's a lot to it and there's a lot to learn. And this is not going to teach you everything, but it's going to teach you something about basically moving away from this paradigm of full on like penetrating, like being penetrated and penetrating, which is kind of like Neanderthalic sex that most people are having, which is just like in and out, friction, done. That's not the experience of sex that most people are actually craving. They want intimacy. They want connection. They want to feel present. They want to feel a sense of merging and transcendence outside of themselves. And a lot of people have never even come close to that because they've never slowed down long enough to be able to create that experience. And so a big piece of this method is just getting people to slow down and to actually breaking down the act of penetration into constituent parts so that you are learning to use to move your body and use your genitals like you actually have a user's manual. Like we never got that user's manual in school. And so what we're learning is that sex is wrong, sex is painful, or sex is wrong, sex is shameful, sex can be painful, sex is dangerous. Like these are the messages we get taught. And it creates a nervous system reaction to sex where we kind of get rushed and we get like, oh, we got to get it over with. And we just got to come as fast as possible. And that's not what makes sex great. What makes sex great is like prolonging the experience, taking your time, like actually engaging in like physical relaxation so that you can actually go into the experience with a regulated nervous system. And then from that place, feel like you can flow with your partner and yes, there's a time and a place for hard and fast, but there's also a place for slow and methodical and just like steady and smooth. And like, we didn't get taught that. And so, Aaron and Saida are the best teachers I have found.
So I want to step away from that for just a second because I want to framework this into current life where we started.
Yeah.
Past life, current or past value systems. And then sex as the fundamental component of sex is to propagate your genes throughout time. Okay, that's the biologically,
your body just says make more people.
Correct. Well, it's almost as if consciousness is producing a set of combination of genetic possibilities with the more successful models over time being propagated through time.
Yeah.
And so that's the mechanistic aspect. And then we have the social contract of marriage or partnership, which are elements that are included in this. And there are seem to be a plethora of confusing ideologies around not just what love is, but what partnership is today. What are the roles within that partnership? And then we also have these biological and perceptive aspects that are built into, which are discounting a large variety of the population out of this. When you look at the dating world, which is that, I forget what the last data I saw on it recently. This is not necessarily 100% accurate, but that, with guys, 50% will swipe right on a dating app for what they would date. And for women, it's 4%. And the distribution of what they're looking from a hypergamous standpoint, which is that connectivity was, bearing a child for 9 months, and also the demands of a small infant or multiple small infants on a female meant that the consequences of her getting pregnant were far greater than a man spreading his seed, because from a biological aspect,
Yes.
sperm is cheap, eggs are expensive. Women produce one
Yeah.
egg a month, men produce billions and billions of sperm every day,
Yeah.
and so the consequence of the choice dynamics are very, very real from a biological cost and survival cost. And
Yeah.
these hangover aspects are leading into sexual selection or partner selection right out of the gate. So now we have, and the awareness of this is just, women have always dated up and across the dominance hierarchy, right? And
Hmm.
one of the physiological attractions is that height, income. There's a variety of things that people go through, how asymmetrical to genetic aspects, and that's why the cosmetic industry and the fashion industry and all of these aesthetic industries are actually acute representations of genetic factors, the whole,
Yeah.
all of that stuff. And then we have the historical aspects of biology and partnership happening
Hmm.
inside of this. And then now we have a mosh pit of things of gender. How many genders are in Canada where I'm from? It's like 72 now officially recognized by the government,
Oh my
right?
God.
And so this, how does one separate past biological tendencies in partner selection,
Yeah.
physiological components, which is what you're talking about here, of nervous system regulation to create this magnetic connection, and
Hmm.
and then the mechanics of intensifying the connectivity through sexual expression
Yeah.
with the modern world and the reduction of social constructs. So how does a person listening to this get like their heads around this within a short time frame? Because we have a lot of listeners who are females.
Yeah.
And there's a biological reality that I think a lot of people are just throwing out the window, and that is women can only have children to a certain point, and
Yeah.
men can have children far longer into the future than women. And which is why women's biological value tends to diminish with age, and men who are accomplished tends to increase. And that inverted curve, it's not fair. I'm not talking
No.
about
No,
fairness. I'm
not
not
fair.
talking about equality. I'm not talking about all of these stupid politicized talking points about. I'm talking about the biological facts, and then this disconnect. So how do you view that within this Adamo method? Are you addressing that? Are you understanding it? Or are you just like, no, you know what, that's too complicated. We're just dealing
You
with,
know,
hey, I want to feel this feeling. I want to have this connection. And here's a way to amplify that.
so I told you about Sue Carter, and I told you about, so I didn't really tell you what she's about, but she basically, um, let me take a step back. So my career has been about understanding health and how do you measure it and how do you improve it. And a big piece of that we've discussed was metabolic health. And that's like the last decade of my
Yes.
life was largely dedicated to.
Yeah.
But what I found really compelling in my course at Stanford was that like love is linked to longevity. And I want to live a long and happy, healthy life. So I was asking myself, independent of the drive to reproduce, which a lot of people aren't reproducing, and independent of the drive to marry, which a lot of people don't need marriage anymore. Like, I don't even know if I want to be quote unquote
Well,
married.
for women in particular, which is interesting, the higher the IQ, the taller they are, and the more money they make, the more likely they are to be not married or not to have children.
Yeah.
It's like the
And
inverted for men.
yeah,
Those three things
wild.
are hallmarks of success. And now that women have all these opportunities, they move up that arc. They are excluding themselves from what was and that's where the hypergamy
Yeah.
tendency, the hangover tendencies of this biological mechanism, which are influencing us metabolically or psychologically or neurochemically more than we may have understood
Yeah.
previous.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about
So
that.
no, it's just like, like, first of all, I'm all for women's equality, and I have been a champion for women being able to show that they can succeed in man's world. But I actually had a big reckoning that was like, the more successful I was getting, the less attractive I was to men. And I was like, Some men are really into power wives and some men are just not. And so it has been a relearning of femininity for me, and a softening and a slowing down and a resting and like a figuring, like for me at least, the next decade of my life is like not about being just like this alpha female, but also like really tuning into the things that are like really powerful within me, which is like my connection to God, my connection to family, my connection to love, my connection to community. And women, women are, a lot of women are looking for ways to, in a world where like marriage is uncertain, relationships are uncertain, how do we create stronger bonds? How do we create a stronger relationship long term? Because we know that strong relationships do predict the success of families, they do predict the success of children,
There's
success of
longevity.
parents. And so I look at investing in one's relationship and relational health and sexual health as a path to investing in your longevity. It's a path.
As a professional female, an accomplished professional female,
Yeah,
when and what prompted that conclusion? Because I really want to explore that for
yeah,
people that are. I have a lot of just what I call killer females in my life, like just
yeah,
like total badass, smart,
yeah,
intelligent, accomplished, and I constantly like I literally have a conversation every couple of days with one of them that reaches out to me and is like, "What's going on?" Like, this sort of stuff.
yeah. Okay, so
And,
like this is
and
gonna sound
I
really,
don't
this is
necessarily
gonna
know how to
sound,
answer this, but I want you to, because you're one of those women
yeah.
and are
So
opening the Pandora's box here on
I am
topics
I
that
am so willing to go into the
cool,
areas that most people
cool.
just like won't do, because I love the edge of anything taboo. And it's very taboo to talk about being a submissive woman in a world that tells you that you're supposed to be a dominant creature, right? Like I've always dominated almost every field that I have entered. And at the same time, I never learned that, actually, from at least my perspective, is that like there's kind of two ways you can do relationship as a woman in this world. And they're both okay. But there's generally two ways. If you're a heteronormative female in this world, you got to make a choice in what kind of relationship you want to have. And one choice is you can be a dominant female, but you're going to have to choose a submissive male to be your
Yep,
partner.
yep,
And they are going to basically, you're going to have to take care of them.
yep,
And
yep,
they're going to be in service of you and your success. There's queens of history that have demonstrated this. Like this is
yep,
a thing, and it's totally legitimate. And
yep,
it's absolutely like, I know women that are like running companies that are making hundreds of millions of dollars, and they have partners that are in service of their success.
yep.
Uh, and
And it's
then,
probably a requisite in I would say it's a requisite. So what was the standard high-powered CEO white male privilege projection that the world has had with the submissive wife
yeah,
in service to that,
yeah,
right? I would say that that position often requires a partner that, whether they're male or female, is going to have to do the same, whether we
yeah,
think that's socially acceptable or not. The nature and complexity of being in a position of that authority, power, and responsibility requires a very someone in that person's life to submit to that, because it's too overwhelming. And I think we see a lot of relationships fall apart at that level because people
yeah,
just can't submit to that level, to that vision of someone else.
yeah. And then there's the other thing, right? Which is like you're seeing a lot of these dominant females like myself that are like playing with a new, like an older paradigm, and like saying, you know what? I've made all this money. I've had all the success. I like love where I am in my life. Like, and I feel really empowered. Like, I felt like I could basically, for the last decade of my life, I felt like I could pretty much do anything I put my mind to. I could go anywhere. I could get into any room. I could travel in any country. I felt unstoppable and completely fearless. And then there's a point where you're just like, wait, I don't have a family and I don't have a relationship. And I've had lots of loves, but I haven't had consistency or stability. And what's underneath that? And there is a certain level of repulsion if a woman is in her masculine too much. If she's stuck in her masculine in her love life, it will repel masculine men.
Oh yeah, as a
because
man, you'll respect her as a professional,
oh
but
yeah,
she is immediately like the inversion of what we talked about, this kind of
yeah,
like magnetic stuff. It's immediately as I think she's great. She's accomplished. I'd love to have her work in our company
yeah,
or support this thing or be the
yeah,
expert or do that.
yeah,
Would I want to be in a relationship? No way. Like,
exactly.
no way. Like,
So
no, that's too much
alive.
friction.
Yes.
And that's literally how a guy thinks. And going back to the friction of
This is the thing,
penetration,
right? Like,
I go, that's too much friction to deal with. No way. Not
yeah,
doing it.
so I mean, oh my God, this all comes down to friction, right? So it's like women are
Friction versus attraction,
versus attraction versus
magnetism.
magnetism,
Right,
right?
right.
And so like I realized that, okay, so I was at a conference last year called the Intelligent Change Summit. And if anybody wants to go to this conference, message me on Instagram. I'll get you a ticket. It's the best conference I think I've ever been to because it's about in making intelligent change in your life. It was about sexuality. It was about professional lives, like entrepreneurship, health. Like it was really so many, like intellectual development. It was just a beautiful conference in a beautiful location, Six Senses, Ibiza. Really, really profound relationships were made there. But I was on four different stages. And I was like basically like featured, and I was talking about biohacking. I was talking about longevity. I was talking about sexuality. People were like, Molly, you are incredible. Like you can talk about anything. You are so knowledgeable. And I was standing there and I was wearing these like very feminine outfits, but I felt like I was still emitting this like super masculine version of myself. And I was like, I have made it in so many ways in my life. I've published a book. I taught at Stanford. I've worked with some of the biggest brands in the world. I've worked with some of the biggest names in Silicon Valley, and I'm still unfulfilled because something's missing from my life. And it was like my femininity was missing. I
Mhm.
had been so conditioned by Silicon Valley culture, which, by the way, this is a very common problem in Silicon Valley, where you see a
Yeah.
lot of men who are very smart and on the spectrum with very powerful women who are very masculine. It's a very much like a weird situation where you see this all the time in
And
Silicon
you
Valley.
probably have the biggest distortion of sexual variance in that area as
Oh, for
well.
sure.
You know what I
There's
mean?
so
Like
there's
that is like the
monogamy, there's
epicenter of all that.
polyamory,
Yeah, all
there's
that sort of stuff.
trans, there's
Yeah, yeah,
cis, there's like you
yeah.
name it, it's
That's probably
there.
the epicenter of it here in the United States.
And I really had to really sit with myself and have a heart to heart with myself. And I was like, if you want your life to change, that you have to change. You can't change your like the best way to change your life is to change your inside from the inside out. And so I said, God, I want to bring in a partner. I want to bring in a more feminine presence. I want to actually, I want to stop feeling this way I'm feeling in my work, where I feel overwhelmed and stressed out and nonstop activity and every single Telegram, WhatsApp, email, Facebook Messenger, Instagram Messenger, four different emails, three different assistants. I was at my wit's end. I was like, this is not the life that I want to live. Like, I'm asking for something to change. Fortunately, whenever I ask God for my life to change, and I'm very specific about what I want, very quickly it starts to come. I'm realizing this is actually part of like this next chapter of my life, which is actually not about science. It's actually about what is this capacity that all of us have, that some people have more so than others, to create reality. And I was like, I'm going to create a new reality for myself. But once you created a new reality for yourself, which was I wanted to, I started dressing, I started wearing dresses. I started cutting back my work schedule. I decided to go to Europe for 7 weeks. I decided that I would slow down and I would actually be more intentional about what I wanted to create and manifest in my life. That I would be more connected to my community, that I would be more connected to my sexuality. Adamo is a reaction to a part of myself that was missing, which was intimacy with myself.
Hmm.
And I called in a partner who exposed that I was actually unable of being fully intimate emotionally with me. So that was my biggest problem. Like the job of a woman in a relationship is partially to be able to open emotional intimacy. And if she is not doing so, the relationship will suffer. So I had to really, really sit with myself the last 6 months and really have like a wake up call and this partner has been like he is like this catalyst of just change and there's just so much that's been unearthed in this love that has basically reminded me that if I want if I am calling in a more traditional relationship, I have to change my life. I have to change my work. I have to change a lot of things. And I'm not changing for him. I'm changing because this is where I want my life to go. And I have a deep conviction that and this is going to sound really, for all the feminists out there, please like either turn off the camera right now or stop listening because I might
I
trigger
think
you.
feminists don't listen to my channel, actually.
Okay. Because here's the thing,
They probably throw me out though. Like they probably.
I am about I believe in egalitarianism, and I believe that
me too. I
just
like that.
because you are choosing to actually submit to a man does not mean that you are weaker than him. It means that you are trusting him with his leadership. And
I would put another word to that. I think
yeah,
than submission. I would say that surrender is a better terminology for people who don't like submitting. In other words, I'm surrendering, which is the letting go of, or as Dr. David Hawkins said in Power versus Force, is the moving forward in a yin position. In other words, I'm willing.
I love that.
I'm willing to step forth into that which is uncomfortable, and I'm willing to let go that which has served me in the past for the opportunity to experience something even grander and more magnetic and connected into this space. And all obstacles within that I encounter are not necessarily obstacles. They're invitations for divinity to find out buried characteristics that are secretly pulling me into my future reality. That's how I see it.
Oh, God, Wade, can you please transcribe that so I can put that on my wall?
Go ahead. But you know,
my God, I can't wait to get this.
I'm so bummed because I got at like 3:00.
I know we got to jump.
So give us all the details. We're going to pick this up again in a few months because I want to see what your progress is going to be. So give us the whole lowdown. How do we find you? Where is Adamo? Where are you from? All that sort of stuff.
www.livingadamo.com and @livingadamo on Instagram. www.drmolly.co. .co, and then same as @drmolly.co on Instagram. So find me in those places. We are running our next cohort likely in spring. We should have our clinical study research back by then, so you will actually know the outcomes that you will achieve from joining our method. And we would love to have you guys.
So beautiful. Thanks so much, Dr. Molly, for coming in today, taking the time and being so vulnerable. I think it's a lovely characteristic when someone is accomplished and professional and has the scientific background and willingness to use that, but explore a domain that's previously not been part of that model. So thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you.
And for all our listeners, that's another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. You can share it, love it, like it, give us your feedback. All good. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope this was valuable for you, and I can't wait to follow up, Molly, on the next one. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: how to get away with eating sugar. Hey, look, sugar is normally one of the worst things for you. But let's be honest. I mean, we all cheat from time to time. And here's a little trick that will ensure your body benefits from the sugar. Now, before you eat or drink anything sweet, take 5 to 8 capsules of P3OM. The patented strain in the formula devours sugar so fast it literally doubles in the body every 20 minutes in the presence of sugar. That doesn't mean that you can or you should eat a bunch of sugar or sit around all day doing that. But on the days that you do cheat, or you go after one of those maybe meals that you wouldn't normally do, this ensures that you get something in your gut that eats the sugar. And it's not going to feed the bad guys or spike your blood glucose nearly as much. So to learn more about P3OM and its sugar-devouring and protein-digesting properties and how it can transform your gut and metabolism, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.